Hello? I'm Aaron, and my story began when I was only 4. On a night when my mom made me pack a bag and put me in the car. They strapped me into a car seat with my teddy bear on my lap and my backpack by my feet. Mommy, what are we doing?
Shut up.
Daddy, what's wrong? Stop talking, Aaron. I felt so confused and scared, and I didn't understand what was going on. But I did know that my parents didn't like me much. However, my twin sister was perfect, pretty, and smart in their eyes. I knew they liked her more. I couldn't help but resent her and them for it. We drove for hours, and I grew more and more scared. Eventually, I started to cry.
Shut up.
But I couldn't stop. I cried right up until we stopped, and I was picked up out of the car seat and left standing on the sidewalk outside of a vaguely familiar house. Mommy, what are we doing here? We? Nothing. But you? You're moving in. You'll never amount to anything, Aaron. We can't waste our time with you when your sister is the one who will make us money. And they climbed back into the car, laughing at me while I stood on the sidewalk crying. They drove away, and I didn't know what to do. I was tired, so I dragged my bag up to the house and curled into the porch swing and held my teddy tight. When I woke up, my aunt was crouched down beside me, and she had a hand on my shoulder.
Aaron, darling, are you okay?
No. Mommy and Daddy left me here.
I'm sorry, Aaron. They called me this morning and told me that they didn't want 2 children, only 1. And they said that your sister was a good business investment. But don't worry, I'll look after you. Come inside. Let's get you a nice hot bath and something to eat.
My aunt carried me inside, and that was the start of my new life. My aunt wasn't a wealthy woman, but she made enough for us. I went to school and studied hard, and I never forgot the feeling of being left behind. I never reached out to my parents, but I always figured that they would attempt to reconnect one day. But I wasn't going to hold my breath. Instead, I let my aunt become my entire family. She was my mom and my best friend. During the holidays, we would spend it with her friends and their children. I never wallowed in the pain of what my parents did. I went to counseling and wrote music to express myself. I wrote books and poems. I made myself a creative conduit for all the emotions I've ever had. I was a creator. One day, when I was 15, I was playing in a local bar for tips and free meals. The boss knew my aunt, and on the nights that she had late shifts, they invited me to play and gave me an empty booth at the back in which to eat and study. I had just finished my set to a rousing applause when someone I found vaguely familiar approached me. She was my age and had blonde hair and blue eyes, just like me.
Hi?
Hello?
I know who you are. Do you know who I am?
I have my suspicions.
I'm your twin sister.
I had assumed this would happen one day, but I expected my parents to be there too. Is it weird that I don't even remember your name?
Yes, it is. Didn't Auntie tell you about me?
She told me she hasn't seen you since they abandoned me.
Abandon is so dramatic.
And accurate. They left me in the street. They didn't even call my aunt until the next morning. They laughed while I stood on the sidewalk and cried.
So you remember a random night when you were 4 and not my name?
I remember the things that matter.
Then you better start remembering me. I've won so many medals and trophies in gymnastics that I'm basically famous. They're talking about sending me to the Olympics.
I couldn't understand what she wanted. Was she really here just to brag? What do you want?
I was just coming to see whether they made the right choice.
Well, consider me flattered that you found me enough of a threat that you had to come all the way down to see me in person. You can leave now.
I'm not here to flatter you. I just couldn't find you on the internet. Must be because you're such a nobody.
Not quite. I just changed my last name. She obviously hadn't considered this at all, and she started to scowl at me.
You know, there aren't any baby photos in the house because of you.
Sorry?
You should be. They basically started anew after they got rid of you, which means all my friends think I'm adopted because I can't show them baby photos because you were in all of them.
What do you want from me? I've done nothing wrong, and you're here to rub my nose in the fact that they kept you? If I had my way, I'd never hear from any of you again. Now please leave. If you don't, I'll have the bouncer show you out.
No, you wouldn't.
I stood up and waved my hand at the bouncer, Tommy. He was a big guy who I became friends with after he was assigned to watch over me the first few nights I was at the bar. He nodded and started walking towards me. Immediately, my sister's eyes went wide and she backed away.
Oh my God, fine. But just so you know, I'm glad my parents kicked you to the curb.
Feelings mutual. I'm blessed that I didn't have to grow up around someone so conceited and horrible. It felt like a fever dream the moment she left the bar. Tommy asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, but I was confused and a little hurt too. Why would she go so far out of her way to make me feel bad? When I got home that night, my aunt was still at work, and so I went to the couch and laid down. I tried watching some random videos on the internet, but although I wanted to drown out my thoughts, nothing seemed to work. Sometime in the early morning, my aunt woke me up.
Aaron, you shouldn't sleep on the sofa. It's not good for you, and you're too big for me to carry you upstairs.
Sorry.
Hey, what's wrong?
My twin came to the bar last night. I quickly explained what had happened, and my aunt grew angrier as I told her what happened.
My sister is the worst. She was always like that when we were younger. I'm better than you, so you're worthless. Mom loves me more because I got a better score on our science test. She harped on about it for ages. It really messed with me when I was younger.
That's why she left me with you? Because she thinks we're both worthless?
No matter what your mother believed, you are never worthless. It doesn't matter what you do, you're still worth something, and everyone is worthy of love.
My aunt was the best at making me feel better. So even with the stark reminder that one family had abandoned me, I still had a different one that never would. Oddly enough, it was the trauma from my past that I started to make a name for myself. I think it was partially because of how she bullied me about not being on the internet much, but I really wanted to prove her, and by extension my family, wrong. And so I uploaded some of my music to the internet. I put it on a niche site where people shared their music and stories with each other, but one of my songs was uploaded to a popular music sharing website, and it became a viral hit overnight. I woke up on a random Thursday to a million messages on my phone, and my aunt excitedly calling me downstairs. By this time, I was 20 and gangly. I had a mess of blonde hair and preferred to wear my high school basketball uniform on days when I didn't have to go to college. It was like this, fresh out of bed and confused as hell, that I met the CEO of the biggest record company in the country. Aaron, is it? Thank you for coming down to meet me. I'm the CEO of Rich Records, and this morning, my daughter came to me and begged me to listen to the new, biggest song in the world. At first, I was worried that our competition had started making waves, but I realized soon enough that you were unrepresented. So, I'm here to offer you representation. Do you have more songs? I stood there for a while with my mouth hanging open like an idiot.
Aaron has an entire library of music he's written. He's really very creative, always writing something. Books, poetry, music.
Seems you've got a lot of talent going on. We could use someone of your ability. It was too much too fast. I was overwhelmed. I had expected this to be a lazy day where I played video games with my friends and studied. I had not planned on being internationally famous on a fluke, but I had to take the bull by the horns. It would be an honor to work with your company, sir. That same day, the CEO took me and my aunt shopping to buy new clothes for a big meeting with his employees. Then, he flew us to the capital city in his private jet, where I met with his creative advisors, and we discussed the breadth of what I had to offer. By the end of the day, I had a record deal and had several tour dates booked. The single was released a week later, and it was the fastest-selling single in the whole history of the company. In no time at all, I was one of the richest musicians in the world, and my name was everywhere. Things were moving so quickly, and before I knew it, I was juggling school and performing at concert venues to massive crowds of adoring fans. I couldn't believe my good fortune. To show my appreciation to my aunt for all that she had done for me, I paid off her mortgage and gave her enough money so that she could retire and travel with me when I went on tour. I also put her in charge of managing my finances, as I knew that she was far more responsible with money than I was. While on tour, I happened to walk by a TV that was broadcasting sports news, and I heard my sister's name, which drew my attention. Apparently, there was a scandal involving her and a few of her teammates. All of them had been taking performance-enhancing drugs, and they had been caught. It didn't sound like they would face any legal repercussions. But she had been denied the ability to go to the Olympics, and her career as a gymnast was over. I couldn't help but chuckle when I heard that. She had been so proud of going to the Olympics, and now she had been caught cheating and would be lucky if she could get a job as a cleaning lady, Several months later, after my tour was finished, my aunt and I went home to relax for a bit before my next tour. As we approached my aunt's house, there sitting on the front porch were my parents and my twin sister. All three of them looked dirty and dressed in torn clothing. At first I wasn't sure it was them and thought that three homeless people had wandered onto my aunt's porch. But as we got closer, I realized who they were.
There you are. We've been waiting for days for you to come home.
For what? Why are you here?
Well, there was a bit of a misunderstanding and we're going through a bit of a rough patch. Just let us inside and we'll tell you how you can help. Excuse me, but we aren't inviting you monsters into our home after what you did to Aaron all those years ago. You have some nerve. You're just lucky that we don't call the police and have you charged with trespassing.
How can you be so heartless? After I was caught with the steroids that Mom and Dad gave me, we lost everything. We couldn't pay our bills and ended up losing our house.
In other words, you were living outside of your means and the debt caught up to you then? Well, that really isn't our problem. You kicked us both out of the family years ago, and you don't have any right to come demanding for us to help you now that you're flat broke. I pulled out my cell phone and called the police, and they arrived a few minutes later. Thankfully, my parents and sister were distracted by talking to my aunt, and so they didn't notice until the police pulled up, and by then, it was too late. And they were loaded up into the squad cars and taken away. We later heard that when they were taken to the police station and were processed, that they found steroids on all three of them, and they were then arrested. It was quite the surprise, especially when they were put on trial, and between the Olympic scandal and being arrested with steroids on them. The judges in their cases weren't very lenient on them, and gave them each 10 years in prison. It felt rather fitting that we got to see karma in action, actually. My parents had abandoned me because they were convinced that my sister was the one that would make something out of herself. And yet I had been the one to strike it rich and famous. Although, I guess she did become famous as well, but for all the wrong reasons. There are times, though, that I wondered that if they hadn't abandoned me, if things would still have turned out the way that they did, and I honestly don't think that they would have. After all, my aunt had been the one to really make me believe in myself, and without her influence, I don't think I would be half the artist that I am today. So even though my parents hurt me more than anyone else on this planet ever could, they helped to ensure my future success by giving me to the one person that would love me more than anyone else in the world. Of course, when they do get out of prison, they'll be dirt poor and will probably come begging for money, and I'll just have to hire plenty of bodyguards to keep them away, even though I have them to thank for putting me where I needed to be in order to become successful. I still have no desire or need for toxic people like them in my life. Thanks for watching.
I am Holly and I am 30 years old, and I have a 10-year-old son, Matthew. My husband is named Nathan, and we've been together for 12 years. I love my little family. We've got a house by a lake next to a thriving town. My husband and I both have successful careers, and our son is smart and doing well in most things at school. That being said, Matthew is also autistic. This means that his needs are different to the needs of others his age, and we have to spend every day learning new things about how to live our lives in a way that helps him. I thought myself and my husband were a team. We were supposed to be working together to ensure we could give Matthew the best start in life. Apparently, Nathan had other plans. We were at home together on a Saturday morning. Matthew was playing with his train set in the living room, while me and Nathan were on the sofa, reading. We were the picture of domesticity. Unfortunately, my job as a nurse doesn't always give me the opportunity to relax, even on Saturdays. And when there's a real emergency, I have to go in. I'm sorry, guys. Work calling.
I don't know why you bother. You don't make that much money anyway. You might as well just quit your job.
You're really going to start that again? Now? Just as I'm about to leave?
Just quit. Then you can stay here.
I will not. I love my job, even if it doesn't pay the most in the world. Leave it alone, okay? I'll see you tonight. Remember, it's Saturday, so he goes to bed at 9:30, and dinner is mashed potatoes and sausages.
I know how to look after my own son.
I shrugged, and I had to fight against the urge to shout at him. However, he had, in the past, forgotten the schedule, and Matthew had a hard time when things didn't follow the schedule. That is, after all, the reason we had them in the first place, to give Matthew the structure he needed, but Nathan had a habit of forgetting. My work at the hospital kept me fairly busy. I had many tasks that needed doing, such as admin work, attending to the patients, assisting with cleanups, and I had to talk to the families. A nurse's work is never finished, and so when I was called in to attend to a car accident, I didn't think anything of it. I walked behind the curtain, and immediately my coworker Anna was pushing me back.
You shouldn't be here for this.
For what? 1,000 possibilities went through my mind, and all of them involved my son. Perhaps my husband had fallen asleep on the sofa and forgot to start dinner at the right time. That would send Matthew into a panic. He might have gotten hurt playing outside or been bitten by the dog across the street that Matthew never learned to pet nicely. Maybe he fell down the stairs or swallowed something he shouldn't have.
It's Nathan. He was in a car accident.
Nathan? That didn't make any sense. What about Matthew? And where is Matthew?
He wasn't on the scene. Call your neighbors.
I did that. Matthew had to be my first priority, even while my heart was beating ferociously in fear for my husband. My neighbor picked up and assured me that while confused and a little upset, Matthew was okay. Will you stay with him? There's been an accident, and I need to be at the hospital with Nathan. She said yes, and then I rushed back over to Nathan's bed. It was a mess. He was unconscious, and they were prepping him for surgery. I still had no idea what was happening. Why would he have left our son home alone? Was he driving somewhere? I stayed at his bedside until he went through to the operation room, and then my coworker Anna returned. What happened? He left our son home alone. That's so unlike him. He knows he can't do that. So where was he this entire time?
Holly, he wasn't found alone. He was found with Matthew's science teacher, and the police footage shows them kissing, and that is what led to the accident.
I sat down in a chair and put my face in my hands. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to connect the dots, but it was plainly obvious what they were indicating, and the picture left behind was not something I want to see. He was cheating on me?
I think so. I'm so sorry.
I can't believe it. There were no clues. I never would have guessed. Why would he cheat on me?
I don't know, but I do know that whatever the reason may be, it will not be your fault.
But what if...
No. Don't even start trying to find excuses for him. There's no good reason for him to do this to you.
But her reassurances didn't matter. All I could think about was whether he'd survive, and when he did, what reason he would give for wanting to be with someone else. He's always complained about my financial contribution. We both loved our careers, but he felt that he made more money, so I wouldn't have to work at all. We talked about it, though. He knew that I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom. He wanted the 1950s housewife, and I wanted to be a hard-working woman. Was that the problem? But the science teacher has a job too, so it can't be that. Did I not appeal to him anymore? I've worked hard to keep my hair full and my skin clear. I exercise as regularly as I can. I eat well. I try. And it's not just for him, but I thought he might appreciate it. Not that I could ever complain that he was doing almost nothing to maintain his appearance. And what about the teacher? Why would she do this to me? She knew I was married. She teaches my son. Does she just not care?
What are you going to do?
Wait, I need to talk to him first. I have to find out why. And then I'll figure out what I want to do. I had no idea what the best way to deal with this was. On the one hand, my husband betrayed me. On the other, he was fighting for his life. He might die. How can I hate him and worry for him at the same time?
Maybe you should call your mom.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that now. My mom is a lawyer and a great listener. She would know exactly what to do. So I called her up. Mom, something big has happened. I explained to my mom everything that had happened. She was angry, of course, and worried too. No matter how badly Nathan had messed up, he was still in the hospital, and we still didn't know if he was going to pull through. My stomach was in knots.
Okay, honey, listen to me. No matter what happens, you're allowed to be angry. He betrayed you and your son. You deserved better, and so did Matthew. If he comes out of this, then you deserve answers. And then you leave him. You cannot trust him. He did more than maybe just go with another woman. He also left your son, who has a neurological disorder, home alone. You will be immediately granted full custody, and you will not have trouble winning the divorce case.
I didn't even want to think about divorce, but my mom was right. He'd put our marriage in the bin and put our son at risk. I hated him for it.
Call me when you get an answers.
I hung up the phone and then sat down. While I waited, Anna brought me a coffee and sat with me as the hours passed. It felt like the hospital kept moving around us while I was frozen in time. 11 hours later, a doctor came out of the operating room.
Holly, I heard this was your husband.
How is he?
He's alive, which is more than I could say about the woman that was driving the car he was in. I think she was a teacher, but we think he might be paralyzed. We won't know until he's woken up. I know this is scary, but we'll have a consultant talk with you about what you can do.
Thank you. The doctor left, and minutes later my husband was wheeled out and placed into a recovery room where I was allowed to join him. I stared at my husband. His face was bruised, and his right arm was in a cast. He looked pathetic in that bed, but I felt my anger rising and falling in confusing waves. After waiting there for a few more hours, he finally woke up and was groggy.
Hey, what happened? Where am I?
You're in the hospital where I work. You were in a car accident, and there is a chance that you will be permanently paralyzed. I could see fear flash in his eyes as he heard what I said and processed the information. But then it was replaced with very smug expression.
Well, I guess that means that you'll have to quit your job so you can take care of me.
You can't be serious? You know that you weren't alone in that car, right? How long has this been going on, and what possessed you to leave our son home alone so you could go and cheat on me? Panic again flashed across his face as he truly began to realize the situation that he was in.
Wait, I can explain. We're just friends.
You were seen kissing her. Listen, I don't want to hear half-baked lies and excuses. Honestly, if you had come clean, then maybe I would have been able to forgive you, but it's clear that you have no interest in being married to me anymore.
It's not that. It's Matthew. People talk about us being the parents of someone with autism and how he doesn't act right. I couldn't stand their comments anymore, and I needed someone to talk with about it.
Is that why you cheated? It bothered you that much what other people said? Well, it goes without saying that once you are well enough to leave here, that you shouldn't bother coming home. You are no longer welcome there.
Oh, is that how it's going to be? Well, that's fine. I'll just move in with Sarah, the math teacher.
No, you can't do that because she's dead, Nathan, and I've heard all I need to. Without saying another word, I stormed out of the room and called my mother again. A few days later, she came and spoke to Nathan in his recovery room and told him that he would need to give me 15% of his paycheck as alimony, and he would need to give up his rights to the house we lived in as well. He just laughed at her and told her that he would see her in court. Strangely enough, though, her offer was her being nice, and she had only offered it because he was paralyzed. But she did as he told her, and she brought him to court. As soon as the judge heard how he had been injured, and the reasons behind why as well, he awarded me full custody of Matthew and forced him to give me 20% of his check as alimony and an additional 20% for child support, since Matthew needed a stable living situation and I had sole custody of him. The judge granted me sole ownership of the house as well. I did feel a bit bad about Nathan losing everything, but it quickly faded as I realized that he had thrown it all away, and that there was no one to blame for his situation than himself. It's been a couple of years since that happened, and I'm happy to say that Matthew has never been doing better. The money that I receive from Nathan allows me to hire Matthew a personal support worker, and they have made a world of difference for him. He is happier and doing better in school than he has ever done before. As for me, I met someone new. He unfortunately is also divorced, and his ex-wife was almost as vile as Nathan. Together, we have both healed from our wounds and are growing stronger together, and his daughter and Matthew get along perfectly. I don't see Nathan too often, but when I do, he always seems quite miserable and does nothing but complain. He still has the same job, but he never has anything good to say about the one-bedroom apartment he is forced to live in or how no one will date him because he is mean-spirited and terrible person. Thanks for watching. Hi, my name is Clara, and I am 23 years old. I have an older sister named Lucy and a younger brother named Blake. My husband Carl and I are actually a newlywed couple, and we have been unbelievably happy for the past 2 months. But our wedding was where my relationship with my brother was incredibly skewered. Here is how everything unfolded. My brother is 17 years old, and he had known Carl since he was about 11. Blake and Carl had always clicked the moment that they met, seeing as they had similar interests in games and sports. Carl soon saw Blake as his own brother, and there was never a dull moment when the two of them were together. When Carl proposed to me 2 years ago, Blake was 15 and absolutely ecstatic. He wouldn't stop going on and on about how Carl was going to be officially part of the family. I thought this was incredibly sweet of him and couldn't wait to get married either. My sister Lucy was incredibly excited as well and almost immediately began to sort out decoration preparations.
Dude, guess what? My sister is getting married. Isn't that right, Clara?
I smiled to myself when I heard Blake excitedly say to his friends.
Clara, look at these flower combinations I've come up with.
Naturally, I was very happy that my siblings were also very ecstatic about my engagement to Carl. My parents were also supportive of this, even though our relationship wasn't the most stable. They loved Carl and knew that we would work out well together. My parents even offered to pitch in some for the wedding costs, but I refused, understanding their care but knowing that Carl and I could handle this ourselves. And so Carl and I worked on the wedding preparations for a while, with Blake even wanting to help for a while. But a while after he'd turned 16, things went downhill from there. Blake had suddenly become obsessed with doing anything that would potentially hurt me, physically or emotionally. And the only thing I had to ask was, why? Blake, what are you and your friends doing?
We're just making a short video. Go mind your own business.
I was absolutely shocked. For my own brother to come over and just waste my expensive groceries on a stupid trend and then call me such a degrading word like that. I really couldn't believe that this is how he turned out to be. Because this was the first time that I'd seen him do something like this. I let it drop because I thought that it would be the last time he did. Turns out I was wrong. Blake kept using my stuff and home to make content for himself. He committed heinous acts that I was completely sick of from the start, such as putting glue on my toilet seat, breaking a window in the house, and even using spray paint on my garage door. I tried countless times to complain about this to my parents, but of course neither of them listened. Blake was their favorite child and one of his school's best athletes, so everyone thought he was some sort of kind and respectful student. I was out at dinner one night with my fiancé and my mom, attempting to explain this situation to her again. Mom, have you seen Blake's online videos? Those are all my groceries and my furniture getting destroyed. Can't you just help me talk to him? Huh?
Clara, I really don't see what the problem is. It's only a little bit of lighthearted fun. Just be more nice to him when he goes to visit you.
Be nice to him? How did my mom think I treated my own little brother? I just shook my head and sighed, carrying on and eating my meal. As I attempted to bring it up once more, my mom quickly changed the subject to my wedding and asked if Blake was going to be the best man.
Yeah, we were considering making Blake the best man. Clara, shaken. He won't though if he keeps deciding to pull those stupid tricks.
Of course he'll be the best man. He's your damned brother. I better see him up with the groom in a couple of months. And do you mind paying for his tux as well? I just thought that my beautiful daughter would be able to help her brother for the wedding.
Yeah, sure, we'll pay for it. It's not a problem.
There is no way that this is happening right now. I got up and stormed over to the counter, paying for the meal before running out of the restaurant. Carl followed after me whilst my mom sat there looking dazed. That night, Carl and I had a long talk about the issues that I've had with my family. He listened to me carefully while I began to cry, and then calmed me down a bit later. We came to a compromise that for the meantime, Blake will be getting a new suit. But the moment that he does something that crosses the line, we're returning it and kicking him from the groomsmen. I texted my little brother and told him that if he does not stop doing what he does, I'll make sure he pays for it. Blake didn't say anything, but I knew he'd seen it. Luckily, he didn't do anything to me for the next 3 months while I was frantically going around with my sister Lucy to prepare for my wedding. And flash forward to my wedding day, everything was going as normal. Blake was in his suit, which made my parents incredibly happy and teary-eyed. My sister looked absolutely stunning as she greeted guests, and I was excited as I waited for the ceremony to start.
Oh my gosh, Michael, it's great to see you here.
Mom, why is Michael here?
Don't be so dense. So what if your ex-boyfriend wants to celebrate your new journey? Ooh, Blake's invited some of his boys too. Clara, why?
Blake invited people? I couldn't believe it. There are clear rules and invitations, including the maximum amount of +1s you can bring. My brother could only invite one person, but my heart sank when I saw around 3 of his friends standing around and goofing around. I chose to go to my room and wait until it was my turn to come out. When the ceremony began, I walked down the aisle and everything up to the kiss went perfectly. When it was time to cut the cake, though, everything went south from there. As I was cutting into the cake with my now husband, I was hit with a big splash of water. I gasped in shock and my eyes darted around. Oh my God. Blake's friends were laughing maniacally and recording the entire thing. I was dripping from head to toe and began to sob whilst running away. Carl was fuming and asked for the boys to be removed from the venue. Crying in my room, I was found by Carl and he calmed me down. We knew what we had to do. About a week later, my mom called me and forced me to attend Blake's graduation ceremony. I began to protest, but my husband quickly explained that this was the perfect opportunity to get back at him. Students were getting called up as the ceremony began. When Blake was called, everyone could read the words on his cap and gown that said he was a cheater and a thief, and loud talking began erupting through the stadium. Blake looked around with a smile, but it quickly dropped when two girls walked up to the stage. Perfect timing. I couldn't help but laugh.
Blake, how could you cheat on me with a girl from another school? You're a sicko and I hope to never speak to you again.
You were the perfect guy until I found out you've been unfaithful to both Emily and me. Absolutely unbelievable. Everybody heard what was going on and began to laugh and talk. Blake fell onto his knees and was crying in embarrassment and partial anger. Nobody was going to let him forget this. Blake's now ex-girlfriend and ex-fling walked up to us and smiled, happy to help us with this. That night, both Lucy and my brother, along with my parents and husband, were all seated at dinner together. Blake was glaring furiously at Lucy, Carl, and I, and so were my parents.
Why would you ever do something like this?
Well, do you not remember what happened at my wedding and everything that Blake had done to me? I'm still surprised that you're on his side after all of this.
On the internet in a terrible way. All my classmates won't respond to my calls.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but honestly, you kind of deserved it for being a real piece of work for Clara.
Well, Clara has a point. Blake, everything that I've seen you do for the past months was completely unacceptable, and I cannot let you just get away with a bit of online embarrassment. You're going to be doing housework for Clara and Carl for the next year. My life is ruined. You can't do that. I need to travel and have fun. No way, young man.
I watched in amusement as Daniel dragged Blake outside and my mother followed. I hear Blake screaming once again before their car pulled out of the driveway. Lucy, Carl, and I just high-fived and moved to the couch to watch a movie and celebrate our success. I still love Blake, but I can't wait for him to learn his lesson on not being such a jerk. Thanks for watching. When the baby and I were home, I called Martin again. He didn't answer, but Barbara did.
Stop calling my son, you whore.
What? I wanted to tell Martin I had the baby.
He's not your husband anymore. You should be ashamed of yourself for being a horrible wife.
Barbara hung up the phone after that, and I didn't hear from her or Martin again until they were back in the country. My name is Andrea, and I loved my husband, Martin. The only issue we had was his mother, Barbara. She was too clingy to Martin since he was her only child. Martin didn't like it any more than I did, but he tolerated it. Since Martin traveled a lot for work, Barbara insisted on traveling with him. She said she wanted to travel before she got too old, but I knew she just didn't like the idea of not having power over Martin while he was away. She involved herself in everything. When I first realized that I was pregnant, I told Martin that he needed to tell Barbara to stop being controlling. I didn't want my pregnancy micromanaged by her. I'm the pregnant one. I should have control over this because it's my body. But Barbara's going to make this terrible. I've already given up so much because she insists on having control.
She has the best intentions, but she is a bit much. I'll talk to her.
A bit much? Barbara follows you on work trips.
She just wants to travel.
I hated that he believed her, but I let it slide since he'd agreed to talk to her. Except Barbara tried to control my pregnancy anyway. She insisted that I wasn't seeing the right doctors. And when I made a diet plan that changed our grocery list, she changed that too.
You have to eat more vegetables or you'll get fat.
My nutritionist...
I told you not to see a nutritionist. Now look at this mess. You're even imposing your ridiculous diet on my boy. Martin should be eating like a king, not a pregnant lady.
Martin saw the nutritionist with me. He's dieting too for solidarity.
Solidarity? Ha! You should be handling the pregnancy yourself.
Barbara was controlling and clingy, and she thought that pregnancy wasn't serious. She went through her pregnancy alone and decided that I should go through this alone too. I kept asking Martin to make her stop, and he kept promising he would. But her behavior never changed. A week before my due date, Martin had a business trip. I didn't want him to go because I was worried that I'd have the baby while he was gone. Barbara insisted that Martin had to go on the trip or that he'd fired from his job.
What will his employer think if he doesn't show up? They might even fire him for missing important meetings. If he takes off work for his pregnant wife before she even gives birth, they'll think he's unreliable.
I didn't want to keep arguing, so I let Martin go on the trip. Like always, Barbara had also made plans to travel with Martin. I was left alone. Normally, Martin was too busy to call on these trips, but this time I was upset that he hadn't called even once. I was going to have his baby. One night, I woke up unexpectedly. I was going into labor. I called Martin in a panic. He couldn't help me immediately, but I needed my husband to reassure me. The baby was a few days early, and he wasn't even in the country.
You've reached Martin's voicemail. I'm probably in a meeting right now. Leave a message and I'll get back to you.
No, please pick up. I called again with no answer. It must have been morning there because of the time difference, so I doubted he was still asleep. Maybe he was in a meeting. I called again. This time the call just ended like I'd been hung up on. There wasn't time to call again. I had to get to the hospital. Since I couldn't drive myself, I had to call for an ambulance. Thankfully, I got to the hospital in time to have the baby. Once the baby was born, I checked my phone again. No messages. Hours had passed, and there was no way Martin was still in a meeting. He must have seen that I'd called multiple times. When the baby and I were home, I called Martin again. He didn't answer, but Barbara did.
Stop calling my son, you whore.
What? I wanted to tell Martin I had the baby.
He's not your husband anymore. You should be ashamed of yourself for being a horrible wife.
Barbara hung up the phone after that, and I didn't hear from her or Martin again until they were back in the country. Actually, my lawyer called me first.
I got the signed divorce papers that Martin sent over. I'm surprised you decided to go through with it after all. I'll file them, and then you've got a few months before you're officially a free woman. Let me know if you need my services to sort out custody arrangements with the baby soon.
Months ago, when I was irritated with Barbara's controlling nature and Martin's reluctance to firm with her, I'd started filing for divorce. It was as simple as both our signatures on a piece of paper. I'd signed the divorce agreement in an overly hormonal state since I was halfway through my pregnancy, but tucked them away in my home office before I caused any real trouble. What did my lawyer mean that Martin signed them and mailed them in? I called Barbara directly, hoping she'd pick up the phone just to gloat about the divorce.
We're about to get on a plane. This better be important.
Give Martin the phone. Right now.
He doesn't want to talk to you.
I had to talk to Martin without Barbara around, so I waited until they were back in the country. Once they were home, Barbara commanded me to pack up all my things and leave, and that Martin and I would sort out the custody of the baby later.
And until custody is determined, the baby will be staying here, where Martin and I can look after it.
I'm not leaving her here with you. She's my baby. Martin, you can't be serious. Martin stood behind Barbara, and he looked exhausted. I knew he didn't like fighting with her any more than I did, but he just let her do whatever she wanted. This was why I had considered divorce in the first place, even though I realized it wasn't really what I wanted. I grabbed Martin by the hand and dragged him to our bedroom. Then I locked the door. I thought you had more of a spine than this, Martin. I don't know what she said to you, but...
Is that baby even mine, Andrea? I know you've been cheating on me. That's why you had the divorce papers ready.
What are you talking about? I haven't had an affair with anyone. The baby is absolutely yours. Do I need to get a paternity test done?
Maybe you should. It might help the custody arrangements.
Martin, listen to me. I never wanted to divorce you.
Then explain how Mom found divorce papers that you'd already signed. How long were you going to wait?
It was pregnancy hormones, and I couldn't stand your mom. She controls your entire life and you let her. I didn't want the rest of my life, or our daughter's life, to be controlled by Barbara. My yelling seemed to get through to Martin. He sat back on the bed and rubbed his face in frustration.
You're telling the truth? You really didn't want to.
I did think about it, but even though I was frustrated, I still love you. That's why I never mentioned it.
Then I have to talk to her. During the trip, she convinced me that you started cheating on me because I was away all the time, and that you'd been considering the divorce because the baby wasn't mine.
I swear she's your daughter, Martin. I had to have her alone because of your mother. Barbara is going to ruin our daughter's life the same way she's ruining yours. Suddenly, it was like Martin was a new man. He stood tall and squared his shoulders. It was sort of intimidating to see him like this instead of hiding behind Barbara. He marched out into the living room.
So, you told the whore to pack her things, right?
Pack your things, Barbara. I want you out of my house immediately. Call some movers if you must, but you're no longer allowed in this house.
Martin, my boy, what are you talking about?
I figured out what you did. My relationship with Andrea hasn't been perfect, but that was my own fault. I let you get in my head and manipulate me. I let you control every part of our lives, but not anymore. You're not my mother anymore.
There was nothing more humiliating than seeing a grown woman sob and beg her to let her stay in the house, especially since it was her own fault this had happened. Martin was firm in his decision, and Barbara moved out all her things by the end of the week. I was glad to see that Martin's confidence seemed to be permanent. Martin and I went to the lawyer to discuss the accidental divorce. Since the divorce still needed a couple months to finalize, we were able to get the request eliminated and our marriage reinstated without too much hassle.
I suppose I pronounce you man and wife now. Just joking, though. I don't have the authority for that.
One night while Martin was putting the baby to bed, his phone kept ringing. I wasn't in the habit of snooping, but it could have been work-related, and I didn't want him to miss the call. It wasn't work, it was Barbara. She'd left a handful of voicemails, and I listened to the most recent one.
That whore wife of yours isn't any good for you. Martin, please help your mother. My bank says my accounts are frozen.
Martin had control of Barbara's bank accounts, which had been her idea. He'd frozen the accounts so Barbara couldn't access them. Martin had made it clear that Barbara wasn't his mother anymore. For a woman as clingy as Barbara, being alone, poor, and disowned by her son was probably the worst thing she could experience. At least Barbara had raised a good son, even if he'd had to hurt her to be a good father to our daughter. Thanks for watching. I'm Jessica, but all my friends call me Jess. I'm 21 and just about to get married to the love of my life. I love to run, write, and sing, but mostly I spend my time studying. You see, when I was 5, my parents died in a horrific car crash. Some drunk driver hit them when they were on their way to get me from school after I fell sick during a school play rehearsal. I think I knew it was my fault the moment we got the news, but I wasn't the only one. You see, my Aunt Miriam was my father's best friend. They were only a year apart in ages, and so they grew up to be inseparable. Seeing my dad and the aunt being so close made me wish I had a sibling. You can imagine how devastated she was to lose her brother and her best friend in one day. My aunt never liked me much, but I think she also didn't like my mom. When Dad got married, his time was no longer fixed on her. I'm telling you this because it's relevant. When my parents died, my Aunt Miriam was the first on the list to become my guardian. I could tell just from looking at her that she hated me more then than she ever had before. But I blamed myself too, so I felt as though I deserved the punishment.
Come with me, you little wretch. I'll make you understand what you've done.
She grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and dragged me towards her car, where she threw me into the trunk and drove me 4 hours to her house. I don't know if I had any expectations, but I remember the darkness of the trunk being so heavy that I could barely breathe. I cried the entire way there, and I don't think I stopped for the next 6 months. Aunt Miriam was the creator of all my nightmares. She didn't care what she did because she didn't think it was unjustified. She never beat me. That was the one thing she did that I think made her feel like everything else was okay. What she did do, I feel, was way worse. She didn't feed me anything other than table scraps. I was no better than a dog in her eyes, and definitely not worth the effort of cooking an entire meal for me. I was thin as a rake by the time I went to school, but it was never taken very seriously. They just thought I had a fast metabolism. I spent a lot of my childhood sleeping in a shed in the garden. It was filthy, damp, cold, utterly miserable, and perfect for the effect she was trying to achieve. She wanted me to feel the pain she'd been forced to feel when she learned that her brother was dead. By the time I was 16, I was sick in so many ways. Sick of the way I was treated, sick of not being allowed to grieve my family, and physically sick. My body was aging faster than I was. I burned easily because of how much time I spent indoors, and I was so malnourished that my height had been irreparably stunted. This was bad enough, but then one morning, just as I was dragging myself out of the house to get to school, my aunt gave me some devastating news.
Don't bother returning after school today. I'm pregnant, and I don't want you to sully the home any longer.
Where am I supposed to go?
I don't care. Get out, and I never want to see your face again.
She shoved me out of the door and slammed it in my face. I couldn't believe it. She'd always been awful, but this was my home, for better or worse. I had nowhere else to go. I looked back at the house that held no happy memories and decided that, no matter what happened, I could get revenge on Aunt Miriam. But first, I had to find a place to sleep. I went to school, as normal, and pretended like nothing was wrong. My friends, few as they were, could tell that something was bothering me. I didn't say, though. I knew they were worried and had been the entire time I knew them. I feared that if I told them what was wrong, they would involve a grown-up, and that would make things more complicated. Grown-ups didn't want to believe that my aunt could be bad because she was on the town council. In everyone's eyes, she was a saint for taking me in after her brother died. I was always a second thought. The poor dear with no parents, but so lucky to have such a great aunt. No one even batted an eye at how I was dressed, or how sick I was, or that I was depressed most of the time. So, no. I couldn't tell my friends because I'd be called a liar on top of being homeless, and that was not ideal. So, I kept myself to myself, and quietly fretted. Later that day, I was in the library, trying to find information about where a miner could go to get housing for work, when I stumbled across a trapdoor. It was tucked underneath the History of Europe bookshelf, and looked almost like it was part of the carpet. I wouldn't have noticed at all if it wasn't for the hollow sound of my foot hitting it. I looked around myself and found that no one was watching, so I opened it up and crept down the rickety ladder. It was dark inside, unsurprisingly, but it was spacious and warm. I hid in a bathroom that afternoon, after the final bell. I kept my feet up from the floor and read a book until the lights went out. I checked my watch, waited a further 30 minutes, and then made my way to the hole in the floor. The first few weeks of living in there were unpleasant, but I slowly figured things out. I smuggled blankets and pillows in, as well as food and books and lights. By the end of the first month, I'd created a cozy nook, and I was able to borrow books as I pleased. I took my studying seriously. I worked hard and came top of my class for almost everything. Living in the school left me a lot of time to get my work done, and gave me unrestricted access to the school's facilities. By the time graduation came 2 years later, I had a 4.5 GPA and 3 scholarships from an Ivy League university. I knew I was well on my way to getting my revenge. They say the best revenge is living well, but I think the best revenge will be living well and ruining her carefully sewn reputation. I knew how to hit her where it hurt, and it was with honesty. But first, I had to get a good reputation myself. I graduated from university and then completed my master's. I got funding for my PhD, and my thesis project was a camera that could be manufactured cheaply and hidden well on a person. I decided I wanted to show off my invention to my aunt, to make her see exactly what she'd inspired. I went to her house and met her 2 tween daughters. They smiled and called for their mom, who looked happy right up until she recognized me.
You!
Yes, me. I just thought I'd come by and show you what I've created. You always thought I would be a waste of space, but this is one of the most innovative pieces of technology in your lifetime. And I've done it all to help people in need. I'm on a shortlist for a Nobel Prize. Imagine how that would have benefited your precious reputation. You could have been the hero that raised a genius, but instead you're the bully that left me on the streets to die. I hope that alone haunts you.
I didn't bully you.
What do you call locking me in the shed and starving me for weeks?
Payback for killing my brother.
That was all I needed to hear from her. The truth. She'd done those things, and felt like she was justified in doing so. A year after the initial release of the abuse cam, I held a press conference to announce big changes in the product. I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of participants under the heat of the spotlight, and I had to prepare myself. I was about to start the main phase of my revenge, the section that would hit the hardest. I thought about all the cold nights, the fear, the hunger, and the pain, and I smiled. Hello everyone, and welcome to the start of the Summer Technology Conference. Thank you all for being here today, and for being so supportive of our company and its endeavors. I'm very happy to be a part of the ST family, and even happier to be able to present you with something new. This product was made with a particular group of people in mind, abuse victims. See, I know a lot about abuse, and I know that most importantly, getting someone to believe you in the difference between being safe and being unsafe. When I was young, no one ever believed me. But watch the camera in action and see just how easy it is to find the truth and share it with people. I showed the video of the confrontation with my aunt, and immediately I could see faces glow as they opened their phones. Presumably they were going on social media to share my story. The moment the conference ended, I logged into my news app and I saw my face split over a thumbnail with my aunt's. It had worked. I had gotten my truth out and there was no going back. It was only a matter of seeing what was going to happen as we went forwards from here. A week after the news was released, I got a phone call from the police. They explained that they had taken my aunt into custody, and the social services were conducting an investigation into her treatment of me and her own children. I watched the news that night.
A local governor has been arrested today as it came to light that she spent much of the now incredibly successful Jessica Stone's childhood abusing her. The claim is that Stone was kept in a shed, and food was withheld. These allegations have come forward during the Summer Technology Annual Conference, where esteemed technician Stone showed the audience damning footage of her aunt, admitting that she mistreated her niece out of a misguided attempt to seek revenge over the death of her brother. The death was caused by a drunk driver, as Stone's parents were driving to the school to pick her up. Within 24 hours, a 5-year-old Jessica Stone was orphaned and then immediately dropped into the custody of an abusive aunt. Sympathies are coming in from across the internet for Miss Stone.
Aunt Miriam was imprisoned, and her children were sent to live with their father. All of my aunt's assets were stripped, and her reputation was in tatters. She would never be able to live out her dream of working her way up to Oval Office. In fact, the way things are looking, she may never be able to work at all. I went to visit her in prison.
What do you want?
To tell you that I've put $1 million in savings for each of your daughters. They'll go to college, start a new life, and never have need of you again. I don't know if you ever treated them the same way that you treated me, but know this. Being capable of treating a child the way you did is more than enough reason for you to be here, and to never be allowed contact with your children again. You disgust me, and I hope you rot in prison. Please subscribe.